everybody, today we are going to be making a snowflake that has radial symmetry. And it could be a snowflake, it could also just be a really cool radial design. Radial symmetry is symmetry that goes around in a circular shape, because we think of a circle as having a radius. I am going to start by folding my paper. I am using a square piece of paper. If you are at home and you only have a rectangle and it's hard for you to get a square, that's okay. Use the rectangle. It still works quite similarly. You could also have an adult help you turn it into a square. So I folded my paper in half. I tend to like to go bottom to top so that this way I can hold my paper to the table. And then I pull down towards me, go out to the side, out to the side. I find that helpful, but however you want to fold yours is fine. So now I have my paper divided into quarters or fourths, and we are actually going to go for eighths today. So we're also going to hold it like a rhombus and turn it into a triangle. And again, out to the side. Out to the side, you get a really nice fold that way. If you want to just fold this over, you can. You can also open it back up, have this line going vertically, and pull that towards you as well. So now I have a piece of paper that is folded. These folds, we don't want to keep folding it and folding it. These are just going to be guidelines for when we're creating our designs. So you'll see that my paper is now divided into eighths, so I have 8 triangles going around in my paper. So what we are going to be doing is we're going to be doing this assignment in 2 parts. We're going to be doing one where we draw it all out, then part 2 is where we're going to add color. So this might take you 2 weeks if you're doing one part 1 week and one part the next. It might take you less time. It also might take you a little bit of more time depending on what you are doing. So the trick with radial symmetry is if you draw something in one part, you're also going to draw it in every other part going around. So these kind of end up looking like a little bit of a snowflake. Snowflakes they technically have a 6-point radial symmetry most of the time. Ours is going to have 8. That's okay. So I am just going to start by making some shapes. I tend to start in the middle, and you can follow along, you can come up with your own, but I do expect quite a bit of detail from your work. So if I go in and I touch that line, so I'm following the folds, and I'm going to go all the way around, this will end up making it look like a flower in the middle. You could make a different shape. You don't even have to have something that would start right in the very middle of your work. And you'll see that it's about the same. It's not perfect, but it's about the same all the way around. So it's already starting to look like a circular pattern. So another thing I can do is if I want it to be more along the same, I can kind of do a measurement just with my hands, and I can do it the same on the diagonals, and then do a different one. So what I'm doing now is I'm kind of setting up my work so that I can make it look a little bit more accurate because it would bother me if the sizes were different. So non-standard measurement, just use your hand. But then what I can do is I can come back like this. And this way they're all about the same size. Now, we would do the same thing if we were doing a mandala, and honestly, we could call this a mandala. I am calling it a snowflake right now more because it is winter, 'tis the season, and when we go to add color, we're going to talk about color schemes as well. So these are going to look fairly wintry, but we could also just call it a mandala. That's absolutely fine. Although we should talk at some point about more of the significance of the mandalas, which we will do with another assignment at some point. But mandalas are fascinating. You could absolutely look that up and kind of learn a little bit about them. They are done by Tibetan monks primarily, but they have been kind of Americanized at this point, and you can find them in coloring books and things like that too. But part of the point of them is that they are fairly relaxing because of that repetition. So it gives your brain kind of a little bit of a break as you are working on them or coloring or what have you. So I'm going to continue to work on mine, and then I will come back and talk about some of the details that I add. At this point, I have most of my design drawn out. I'm feeling a little bit stuck on if I should add more or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move on, start my coloring, but understand that I might add more out here. I'm pretty happy with this part in the center. So what I want you to notice is that there's a very clear symmetry happening. So I drew these on the diagonal folds, this series of 3 dots. I drew it on every single diagonal fold. What I started with in the center went all the way around, and then I kind of went kind of every other. So I did this shape and then kind of that leaf, and it makes an A-B pattern going around. Then I added some triangles, and I ended up putting some circles inside because I felt that they were a little bit empty. Out here, there are more triangles because I like, if you ever looked at snowflakes that have been underneath a microscope, they're very angular a lot of time. And so I kind of drew inspiration from that around the outside. So at this point, I am going to start to color. Ideally, you will use colored pencils. However, that's not required. You can use crayons. It's just going to be a little bit more challenging in that you're not necessarily going to be able to get into some of those smaller spaces. What we are going to be doing next is we are going to be using a color scheme to fill in our snowflakes or our symmetrical snowflakes. And I am going to choose cool colors. So I have a blue, like a light blue. I have a regular blue, so this is like your primary colored blue. I also have a violet. Green is also a cool color, but for this I really want to go for those wintry ice kind of colors, and I did not personally feel that green would help that, but that's up to you. I am also including a little bit of black. I'm not sure if I'm going to use it. I'm going to save it for last. So I'm going to put that off to the side. One thing to note with your colored pencils, if you are using them, you really don't want to use a hand crank or an electric sharpener for these. You really do you want to use a little hand one. The colored part, what we would consider kind of like the lead of our pencil, on colored pencils is not as hard as your typical graphite drawing pencils. And so electric and the crank ones they will just eat these up a lot. I will say that sometimes, depending on the quality of the pencil that you have, they will tend to break in the sharpener if you're pressing into it too hard. You also do not need it to be perfectly pointy. So if you really look at this one, it is not super sharp at the tip. I've left like that broken part a little bit right there. So I sharpen over a container because this way it saves me from getting up and having to walk over to a trash or whatever every 5 minutes, which really takes away from my working time. So I just sharpen right over a container or a cup, and then at the end I will dump it out. So this one is almost a little bit too sharp. You'll see that it goes right to a point. So that's actually going to break a lot easier. So you do want to be careful when you're sharpening. If you get a really fine point, yes, it looks cool and it gets into those little tiny spaces, but it's also much more susceptible to breaking. So there is kind of a happy medium. And I just leave my sharpener right in there. Just make sure that you don't throw it out when you go to throw out your pencil shavings. So I am really pushing the use of value and shading with my students right now because I think it's a really great tool. It can create some really cool effects in your artwork. So one of the things that we are going to do is we're going to reinforce what we have been doing. So I'm using my regular blue and I am going to press firmly kind of towards where these shapes are overlapping. And then as I pull out away from those shapes, I'm going to get lighter, and I do come up the sides a little bit and lighter, and I'm just kind of trying to show, hey, there's a shadow. This shape is in front of that one. And I am just going to literally go around and color this in using different values. Some of it you might color in the whole space with a lighter value, like I'm coloring this in really lightly with blue. And then I can go back and darken this up. So you can always go darker with your coloring. It is quite a bit harder to go lighter with your coloring. And I know that in my videos it shows it as being a lot lighter than it is. So if you look, you will see that it actually is fairly dark, and as my pencil gets worn down a little bit more, I will go back in and darken that up. It's just right now I can't press super firmly because my pencil will break. So you can even start with your lightest value if you know that you're coloring in this whole thing with one color. And then as you go over it more and more, it will darken up. So I know you can't really see that. It looks really white, but it is actually blue, I promise. All right, I will check back in a little bit and update you on my progress. At this point, I want you to notice that I have really been working on kind of that value blend, which can be relatively hard for some students. So I'm also going to show you another way that you can demonstrate the ability to use value without having to make those really the more complicated blends. So one thing that you can do is, for example, right here where I have my 3 circles, is I can make one quite dark, one medium, and then 1 light. So I'm kind of getting 3 different values that way without needing to have them blend into each other. So for this assignment, yes, I am looking for value, but you can demonstrate that ability in a couple of different ways to kind of challenge yourself more, or if you are a friend that kind of it is hard for you to do, then go this route a little bit as well. So I am going to continue going using a little bit more of that idea in these sections so that you can see kind of what I'm talking about. It's almost, this would be called a value scale, where you're going from dark and getting lighter and lighter. There are so many different values. I would love to see at least 4 different values, but I do understand that this is, what I'm asking is a little bit tricky. So try your best to get at least 4, and when we talk about your artwork, I want you to be able to point out those 4 different values to me. I want you to be able to say, hey, here is my darkest value, here is my lightest value, here are 2 that are in between, or kind of something like that. So even in here, I can go in and press really firmly. I can do medium, and this is all with the same colored pencil. Lighter more. Okay, so it's subtle, but this one is darker than that one. And then I can go even lighter, and it doesn't mean leaving white spaces, it means coloring really lightly. So I still am expecting to see neat coloring going all the way to the edge of your shapes. Okay, we're not leaving white spaces. So if I show you this one, you will see that I pretty clearly have 4 values. This one is lighter than that one, but I can also make this one just a hair darker. But you can literally see my darkest, my medium, my lighter, and then my lightest. And I'm just going to go in and do a little bit more on that one, so it's a little bit more obvious. And now I'm much more happy with it now. So you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, I would make this the same all the way around. All right, I'm going to keep going, and I will check back in a minute. At this point, I am going to call my assignment pretty much done. I might personally, just me being me, go in and add a little bit more detail to it later, but for any of my students, I would consider this a finished piece. One of the things I wanted to point out is that I did do some of the blending value changes, but I also did some of those like value scale value changes where I went from dark, medium, medium light to light. So I am demonstrating that I can do both of those techniques in my artwork. I filled the entire space of my paper. I did leave kind of this background area white. If you don't have a very clear background area and your whole paper is colored, that is absolutely fine. I kind of like how the white is almost like the lightest value. Something else that I could have done is I could actually go in with my black and start dark in some areas and then get lighter for the background if I wanted to. I might choose to do that a little bit later. But what I am demonstrating is the ability to create something with radial symmetry and using value to color in my work with a color family. So I used cool colors on this, and I hope you enjoyed following along. Again, this would be the end of part 2, and you want to make sure that your work is really your very best. So double check it before you call it all finished. All right, thanks for following along. I hope you had fun. Bye, everybody.